All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to my channel. This is JC Berne, author of The Hybrid Helix and 7th level Halfling Pun Master. And today we have a very exciting event. RR Virdi, we can call him Ronnie, is joining us today to talk about first binding, he's going to talk about what we want him to talk about. First binding, The Doors of Midnight, his upcoming release, which comes out very soon, and some talk about storytelling a little bit. And I'm going to read a little bit from his bio if I can find it. Yeah, so Ronnie is a USA Today bestselling author, 2-time Dragon Award finalist, Nebula Award finalist, wrote The Grave Report and Books of Winter before, and Monster Slayer Online, and Shepherd of Light, which I haven't read. Sorry, I shouldn't say that or admit it online.
No, perfectly fine.
All right, well, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. I did actual research. We got a couple people in comments also. I know. Hey, also, how you doing? Britain. We've got Sadir. Oh, I never see one of these. That's fantastic. Hi, Sadir. Sadir was at Dragon Con also last year, so we all sat around eating cheesecake together. Too. Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, we flew out around the same time, so we lounged in the airport together.
Oh, nice. That's excellent. I was a different flight, so it was exciting. It was a big thing for me. It's actually Sadir's the reason I was at Dragon Con, because I was like, if you can make it from Sweden and I'm in New York, I don't have an excuse to like skip this con. So we're gonna I have a whole bunch of questions listed out, and I figure we're just gonna start tackling them. So I'm going to start with this. So Ronnie, you're well known at Dragon Con as the food guy, the cheesecake guy. We were all super impressed. Ronnie found this cheesecake from this diner around the corner from the con, and once he started eating it, everyone was super jealous. Everyone else ate it. Do you have other foods at other cons? Is this a thing you do, where like the best thing to eat at all these different places?
I try to. If it's a convention I go to enough, yes. Like RavenCon, there's a pizzeria nearby. I think it's called Marco's. It's just saved in my laptop, and we always at least order once from there because they have this amazing white sauce pizza that's phenomenal.
White pizza.
I try to find places for good food because at conventions, there's enough of like bad food that's really marked up around them.
Yes.
Most of the hotels have overpriced, ridiculously mediocre food.
Yes.
And you're there to like hang out with fellow like minds. Like, and I find it happens best over good food. Like, you're in a new city, why not try it? You have a place where the environment might be a little bit more quiet. You can enjoy a meal and then catch up with actual peers or even fans and friends. And it makes the convention experience better. My whole reason for doing cons is that I was told, like, don't do cons for yourself and like ego and stuff, which sometimes gets to people. You're there to give it back to the fans because the one place they can interact with you, and then your peers, who hopefully you get to keep doing this with every year or as consecutively as you can, because you build those friendships over ages, like, you know.
Right. Oh, that's cool. How long have you been doing Dragon Con? You just told me and I forgot. It's been
7 years.
Wow.
Yeah, about since 2017. That's when they.
Do you find that there are people there who you met there who you see again and again and interact with? And I know they have you on a bunch of panel. You got a lot of panel action now. I assume that wasn't true at the beginning, or was it?
Oh no. Actually, my first year, Dragon Con was really nice when they invited me. They actually put me on a large amount of panels starting out. They were. It's one reason I recommend the convention so much. They were super genuinely sweet.
Ooh.
The track moderators reached out to me. We worked on schedules.
Wow.
What can I commit to? What can I not? How many days are there? Like, am I going to be there? Scheduling conflicts. I've always had nothing but the most amazing time at Dragon Con. I haven't had a single bad Dragon Con in my life.
Now this was pre first binding, unless I got unless I have my schedule way off. So how were you known to them at that point in time? Like, was this just from the urban fantasy, the Grave Report series?
Yeah, so the Grave Report series got me into Dragon Con after my urban fantasy works were the ones nominated for the Dragon Award back in 2016 and 17, and that put me on the convention's radar.
Nice.
And then some of their larger traditional authors have also been mentors or looked out for me in my career at times. And I know that like some good word was also put in. I was very fortunate to be recommended. Have kind things said about me by authors who believe in passing it forward. So 2017, they invited me as a professional, attending
Uh,
professional, and then I did everything I could. I applied, went through the application process the way
right.
you're supposed to, and they've just been super sweet ever since. Like they just always reach out.
Did you already have? I know you know Jim Butcher, and like he's been a big influence on you, sort of personally. You've talked about how he saved your life. I know he's blurred for you. Did you know him at that time? Had you already had a
No,
relationship with him? Oh,
no. So
okay.
that started happening 2018, so 2 years after my
Ah,
first Dragon
right,
Award
right,
nomination. This was like other authors who'd already been doing the con. Some like
right.
mid-level like indies, I guess you would say. Like I don't like the stratification and like putting ranks on indies and authors. I hate that. I don't. But there's people always have these weird like I guess qualifiers like easy like there's a famous indie author, and then you'll have someone who's like people know them but they're not like I guess pop culture famous or something as like a tier.
There's
So
a
they were
tier.
like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know, but I hate that. But
I know.
it's like the
I know.
easiest way to like truncate it and not
Yes,
take like 10 hours explaining.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, yeah, like the very good gentleman. He would go around doing indie
Uh,
booths and stuff, selling books. Also an indie publisher. He's picked up a lot of people. He's recommended me to a lot of cons. He actually hosts the charity Dragon Con D&D games they do. So he's one of the people who was
oh,
super sweet and put my name forward. Um, yeah, like I said, a lot of this has been generosity of other people too, paying it forward.
yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. All right. Okay. Um, good. Any okay, that's what I had about Dragon Con. So next question. Why initials? I ask as another person who goes by initials in all my publications, but why RR and not Ronnie or something else?
Because I actually have two names that start with R. So one is Ronnie, which is obviously like the Romanized American name that my parents gave me, and then the other R is an Indian name, specifically Punjabi, and it also starts with R. So it's just me using my actual initials. I felt like it fit, and it felt very fantasy. And I didn't have to reach really far, right? And then it came out later. I didn't even think about it, but it happened to seem like it worked out because there's the history of J.R.R. Tolkien and then George R.R.
Yeah,
Martin. So it's like, okay, well, that's just a happy coincidence at this point. I was like, I'll just take it.
cool. Cool. Your parents are Punjabi? I think
Yeah, yeah,
okay, okay, okay. Very good. Very nice. In case any viewers aren't aware, India is a large place and it's broken up into regions, and not everyone is from this one monoculture
yeah,
or
yeah,
language or anything, which I
yeah.
have learned late in life, unfortunately. But that's a whole other story. Okay. All right. So the initials now. Okay, you talk a lot about we're blasting through questions. This is great. You talk a lot about gym, going to the gym, and I have to know a little bit more about your routine and what kind of work. You strike me as I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess, and you can shoot me down if I'm wrong. I'm going to guess you're hitting the sort of 90s bodybuilding style workouts, and you're not doing like CrossFit or
Oh no,
cycling
no,
or
yeah,
anything else.
yeah.
But you tell me what's the is it like aesthetics? Are you looking to just stay in shape? Is it what's your gym life like?
So it's definitely more bodybuilding centric towards hypertrophy, so putting on size and strength with that, but also for like mobility, stability, and longevity. Because I don't only just do bodybuilding stuff. For me, I believe there's some gaps in that because my dad actually used to do bodybuilding growing up, and then my uncles are powerlifters, and it didn't unfortunately prevent them
Huh.
from a lot of like the life wear and tear that you get like as
Yes.
you age, like loss of flexibility, back pain and stuff. And so
Feel
I
like you're
do try to
talking right
do it.
to me.
Yeah. A lot of the bodybuilding stuff comes from like I've struggled with depression and my appearance like
Okay.
growing up for a long time. So there's some aesthetic stuff, being completely honest, but it's also just functionality, staying healthy, and the gym has actually been really good for my depression on the chemical side. Just having worked out, I always feel better in the day after my workout. So I actually scheduled them around like sort of this time, but this is a day off anyways. But I do them close to the afternoon rather than evening because it makes sure the second half of my day usually I get the pickup I need. And then in between that, I also substitute things like I will do yoga, dynamic stretching, and I will do calisthenic stuff that is supposed to strengthen particularly your posterior and lower back chain. Because that is like the number one thing that gets most people as they age, right? And I don't want to ever have that. So it's like preventative care before. That's actually one of the largest causes for like reduced all-cause mortality rate is having a weak core and lower back to posterior chain. So it's like you actually live longer if you train those parts of your body too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, so and plus I'm in a profession, right? Both of us are where you sit for long periods of time. That not that's like the biggest reason those parts also atrophy. So it's actually worse. It's
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
like you're not gaining muscle. this lifestyle actually deteriorates muscle along certain parts of your body. So
You're
anything in
literally
between,
sitting on your posterior chain, right? That's not
yeah,
good for muscle growth, right?
yeah.
That's a, so were your uncles living in the States? Was this abroad where they were doing
No,
powerlifting?
it was all in India.
Ah,
They competed like at the state and national level for wrestling,
oh,
for powerlifting and stuff. And that's actually why in
nice.
the first binding I make a point to point out that wrestling is an
Yes,
actual career path in the ashram people can study, because Indian
yes.
academic like universities, going back all the way to Nalanda, which was the
Oh,
first and the oldest residential university in the world. They actually always focused also on sports. Like,
mhm.
people don't know that, but ancient universities are actually had, just like you with the Greeks, like wrestling was an actual practice you could pursue. The idea of being a strong man and a wrestler for entertainment. So it's
Yeah.
always been part of my family, but then I also made sure it was also part of the curriculum in the first binding.
Right. Well, I mean, Indian wrestling is famous. I want to say Gama, but I might have that name wrong because I
There's
haven't
that,
looked at
and
that
then
in a
there's
long
also
time.
kabaddi, which is kind of like
Yeah.
wrestling meets rugby. Is the closest analog I could say, because people play in
Oh,
loincloths, but it is like
yeah.
a ball sport. But you are trying to tackle and wrestle the other guy to the ground,
I can see
who
that.
has like essentially the ball.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Let's go through some comments real quick. Don't fall for the smolder show asking the tough questions. I'm asking all the tough questions. I have notes, Bo. You'll be shocked. I have a whole set of notes. My friends. Daniel's a good buddy. Cheesecake this year at Dragon Con. I'm very much looking forward to that. Amazing barbecue place we went to in Atlanta. That was really good. A bunch of us. So we went with Mihir and a few
Yep,
other
yep.
people to this barbecue place. Big container of candy when you come back. Okay. Adding a George. Yeah, just but I get
I
you with
think
the
that would be
initials, right?
famous.
Um,
No, that is not true. My favorite day is not leg day. I hate leg day. I think anybody tall hates leg day because the amount of work you have to do multiplies the longer your legs are.
leg day's easy for me. My legs, I can bend them completely, and it doesn't move very much. It's a very
Yeah,
short stroke.
see,
So
I'm not. Most of my height is in my legs.
yeah, no, I'm the opposite. I'm a little halfling, so but that's fine. Okay, so yeah, I think I found that also as I got older, my workouts shifted like a little bit away from aesthetics and a little more towards I just got to keep myself able to move, and get around like um okay, so gym stuff. Okay, so let me ask you another big thing of yours, another big love passion of yours is cars,
Mhm.
and I know lots of people are car people in sort of different ways. What is it about cars that you appreciate or love? Like, are you like I like cars that look cool, or you like I like cars that perform that are maybe fast in a straight line, fast around a track? Is it cars that you can work on? Like, what's the sort of the thing that pulls you in to cars?
Oh,
Or
wow.
all of them is
Yeah,
fine.
it definitely is all of them. I've actually
Okay.
given this more thought over the years as I've gotten older,
Sure.
like why I have such an emotional connection to them. And I definitely started working out on them young, right? My dad was a
Right.
cab driver, so a lot of maintenance he would do himself. We had a lot of interesting cars in the house that had beefy engines because at that time through the 90s, when I was born and my dad was a cab driver in DC, a lot of cheap cars were like late 80s cars and then early 90s, like they were shoving really big, powerful motors into sedans that you would use as a cab. So, like the Chevy Caprice at the time had the LT1 motor, a 350 small block V8, and that came out of the Corvette and the Camaro and the Firebirds of that era. And then similarly, the Ford line, so the Crown Vic, the Grand Marquis, and the Lincoln Town Car had the twin valve 281 cubic inch V8 out of the Mustangs of the same era. So these were like 250 to 300 horsepower cars, depending on the tune.
Right.
That were really just four-door muscle cars, and they were fun to work on. They sounded great. It was a bonding experience with my dad, and he and I don't have like the best relationship, but it's something I still remember. And over the years, we eventually moved to a neighborhood which my parents still live in, and I have an emotional attachment to that. It was like the first home that the family was able to get from apartments. Grew up in poverty, so like that was a huge sign. And we lived in a neighborhood that was a pop up community.
Mhm,
And what I
mhm.
mean by that is like all the homes were the exact same size, and
Yep,
I think they were all built like in the '60s, like
yep.
for the Korean War era, like for
Mhm.
soldiers coming back because there were a lot of soldiers here who served in there. Like the guy across the street from me growing up as a kid had a flag like up on the flagpole that he served in the Korean War, and he had a old muscle car, Oldsmobile Cutlass 442, Super Sport, I think. And that was like a common story in the neighborhood, right? There's a lot of like grandfathers or great grandpas who'd served in the war, and they probably blew one of their checks or maybe their signing bonus on the muscle car down payment, right? So I grew up around that stuff too, and it's always been in my life, particularly American muscle cars. Um, and I think as
Nice.
I got older, it became like a sign of independence and freedom, in two different ways. Because like the independence to be able to work on your own car, and
Mm.
like see your own growth, and you can tackle problems, right? Like there's a certain way to fix a problem. If you do everything right, you usually fix the problem. There's a very mechanical way to go about it, and I'm not academically inclined, but I was weirdly really confident and able to do things with my hands, and I'm not sure why, but there was genuine joy in that, like fixing cars, and
Mm.
I definitely loved obviously cool cars. Like my high school car, which I still have to this day, is a '97 Arrest Me Red Trans Am that's supercharged. So it was like the same 350 LT1 motor, blown out to like 545 horsepower. It had more power than the transmission could handle because we actually blew up the torque converter one day when I was doing something I probably shouldn't have been doing in the car. But yeah, I definitely do like cars for aesthetics. Like my goal was to make enough writing that I can buy a few old project cars to restore and just share them on the internet with people. We'll
Are you a
see.
road trip guy? Are you a road trip? You like go in a car and going like 200
I
miles?
oh my god, my happiest thing. This is actually a specific fantasy I have. I want to find an old '66 or '67 Mustang convertible. Specifically, I don't care if it's a V6 or not. I want to restore it, and I want the convertible specifically because I kind of think it's one of the most American cool like beach cars
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
take on a road trip. You can have your friends and it has enough trunk space. It's big, beautiful. I want it in one of the old school colors like marina blue or like a seafoam green, like the metallic. It's light, it's classic American. It's not like a show car. It's meant to be driven. Like the contrasting white top. I would be happy to put like even a modern Mustang EcoBoost V6 in it. I don't want the noise or power. I actually want something that's kind of like there as like a memory piece with your friends. You can get your friends in it, load up the trunk, and drive like 6 to 8 hours to a beach, Airbnb, and spend like a week there with your best friends, barbecuing. And like the car's part of the memories. Like it's a beautiful set piece. Like keep it in the photos. You memorize the drive going down, and you take the time to enjoy it. You don't just get there in a flight. I am definitely that as an extrovert. I would love to take road
Yeah.
trips with like beautiful cars and like
Uh,
friends especially because I'm not a
nice.
very like do it for myself person unless it's like a daily drive. I do like that. I like driving alone, for me, but not big road trips for myself necessarily. I like them.
Yeah.
I get more joy and value if it's with a friend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We lost something when we had to shrink our cars, right? I had a friend in college with like a 75 Chevy Impala, and you could seat like 7 people in that thing, right? Like it was a
Yeah,
boat,
the
you know?
70s cars were boats. Yeah, those things
Oh
had
yeah,
no
oh yeah.
horsepower, but they were, oh my
No,
god,
no.
they were too
You,
long.
you couldn't go fast. You know, you had to stop to go around a corner because you couldn't go at any speed. But man, we could all go to the movies. And it was also an era we were in college. Like we didn't all have
Yeah,
cars, you know, a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
so it's like,
exactly.
Mark, let's all load in the Impala. We'll go wherever. And you
Yeah,
can't do
yeah.
that now. Like you get a decent sized car, you're rarely fitting. Well, you can get an SUV,
Well,
but I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
That's a
absolutely.
whole other story. My mom's in chat. Tell him that's my dad's car, Buick convertible red. Yeah, my dad loved his Buicks. Um, uh, okay, so you're talking about classic cars. Are you not a fan of the more modern cars with a lot of the
I am.
electronic driver aids? Or
Oh, I am. I
okay,
just think it's a narrower band, right? Like I love. I
they're
actually do
harder to
like
work on.
they are in some ways they're actually easier too. There's more that's going on, but because the level of diagnostic tools that go on, it's also easier to diagnose problems in some ways because you have an
Okay,
onboard computer that will tell you that.
right.
Now, doing a lot of the labor can be pain intensive. But it's a narrower scope. Like I love a lot of the new muscle cars, but I kind of am stopping loving them as we're getting to where we're right now, where a lot of body styles are changing and everyone's chasing this weird, like shapeless cyberpunk aesthetic that like the new Mustangs are starting to look a little bit too much like a Tesla. Like the way they're rounding a little bit too much of everything. Like unique cars that have a unique presence, I think are still important. And I feel like a lot of cars are losing that soul, including with some of the driver aid. Like one of the biggest critiques a very popular car, the Nissan GTR, has gotten is as it's coming along since they revived the brand, like in
Mhm.
2008 or whenever that first GTR came out. It's had no soul. Like it's getting as a machine better and better and better and faster with more driver aids. It's gotten to the point where it almost doesn't need a driver. It feels like, and I think that's weird. Like Mustangs for the longest time had a solid live axle, right? Like a solid rear end. Like that thing is really great for a straight line, not for curves. But the cool thing about that is you kind of have a car that wants to kill you. But that kind of also adds to the pleasure. Like you can keep a Mustang in line. It's like one of the jokes with the Dodge Viper, but why it's become such a cool car is like a Dodge Viper is trying to kill everybody. There have been more of those cars. I think more Dodge Vipers have been crashed than are left in the wild to owners. It is a very dangerous, high performance machine. But
you've got to pay attention when you're driving it, which means you're paying attention when you're driving it, right?
I love that. Like
one follows from the other.
I loved the era of the air cooled 911s, the Porsches. And I actually still like a lot of the Porsches up until recently. Like I think up until 2016, like the GT2, the GT3, I loved all of them. I think we're in a weird place for cars with the massive EV push, which that gets me in trouble because I call out the pollution cost it takes to make an EV. Studies have shown it's actually more environmentally friendly and better to find a 2000 car and just rescue it. Just get it back on the road. Like get a Camry, get a 2004 Camry. And if you spend the money just maintaining it versus buying a brand new Tesla, that's actually better for the environment because that car's already been built. Its emissions and everything's already been regulated. It's already accumulated what's going to accumulate in production. And it's already a very fuel efficient car. And now
it's going to weigh half as much. It's going to do less damage to the roads and bridges, right? The tires will last twice as long.
Absolutely.
Right?
People don't want to hear that.
No, they don't.
And
I hate electric cars, and I get a lot of flack for it from my left-leaning community. So
yeah,
you're preaching to the converted here.
There's a lot of slave labor that goes into mining the cobalt for those batteries.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. And then the actual pollution cost that goes into the rare earth mining of that. And then people don't know the batteries are shipped across the world on giant tankers that pollute way more than anything just to get the batteries to where the cars are assembled. It's not great. Actually, this recently came out. Toyota just invented a brand new hydrogen engine that might be one of the best made engines of all time. It's a 400 horsepower V6 that burns on hydrogen, which is also going to be environmentally more friendly than any other engine because the output of a hydrogen engine is water.
It's water.
When you're burning, it's water.
It's just really hard to store. Like getting enough hydrogen in a car to like drive very far is not easy.
Well, they've improved the mileage, so we might see because and I know people are afraid of hydrogen, but like it's liquid hydrogen, not gas hydrogen that they're using, and we already have liquid combustibles in cars they don't blow up. Like we're pretty good at like actually storing fuels this day versus a giant blimp from like 100 years ago.
A blimp covered in flammable material.
Yeah, exactly.
People forget, right?
Versus like secure gas tanks that have a bladder inside too that protect the fluid. But people don't like hearing that answer. Like I still keep up with everything car stuff. I genuinely love it. I'm hoping for honestly like a green car movement where people actually realize that we have green fuels and then we actually have green car building materials. Porsche just actually built a hood out of hemp that's lighter and as strong as carbon fiber. So it's better than current car manufacturing stuff and it's built from a plant.
In an emergency, you can smoke it.
Yeah. Don't
worry, guys. I've got a hood.
But I love the idea that high performance cars could one day be hydrogen, meaning if you like the sound of cars and you want like a fast car that burns fuel, you could have a hydrogen 400 horsepower car that sounds like
alcohol if you brewed alcohol from the right plants. I'm not even kidding. You know, you could or artificial gasoline, which you could make from solar panels. You could brew that stuff up.
Absolutely. There's a car.
I would love to do that stuff.
There's a 66, I think Chevy that's called the turbine car, and it had a turbine engine. It's one of the only ones. Horrible mileage, but the way the turbine engine was built it was so powerful and had such a high compression ratio, it could burn anything flammable. There are actual real legal accounts of people who burned like Chanel, like they actually just to see if it would run. So they ran it on perfume, on like wood alcohol, anything flammable, it would run on. It's a bulletproof engine because its moving parts are so different. It's just a giant turbine. If it was compressible and flammable, the car would run.
Right.
Like you just run it off fry oil or something. It was wild.
Fry oil. There are cars around here that were running off like recycled fry oil, and you'd smell like French fries whenever the car would drive by.
Yeah, people you can convert diesel cars to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in light of this passion of yours, hypothetical scenario. You sell first binding to HBO, you get some sweet cash deal where you can irresponsibly waste some of it. Let's call it $1 million just to
All
be
right.
for no particular reason.
Ooh.
What did I do here? I just lost my own. What's your dream garage? Let's say you can have $1 million to build your dream garage. Let's make it limited. Let's say let's stick to only 3 or 4 cars at most. What
Okay.
would you? It doesn't have to. You don't have to spend $1 million. If you want to go under,
I'll
you
go.
can go under. But what would you put in your dream garage with your sweet HBO money?
Okay, so there'd be a lot of replicas because I wouldn't be spending the million. I'd have a lot more money left over to do more stuff to them. 66 Shelby Cobra convertible. I don't know what engine I would put in because there's too many options. I love the idea of taking the 281 out of the SN95 Mustangs because it's really reliable and you can easily get it naturally aspirated to 400 and have a great daily driver that doesn't want to kill you, but it looks like it's an old school Cobra. I would definitely have the same year Shelby Daytona, which is the coupe racing version of the Cobra. That's a hardtop that looks like the Ferrari 250 and the GTO. That they actually went up to race against because I love that platform. I would have either a C5 or a C6 Corvette Z06 because I want cars that I love working on. They're affordable. They're like a working man sports car, but they compete with some supercars. But I love the Corvette platform. The LS motors are some of the best ever built in the world. It's why there's a joke in the car community like, will this fit an LS? Because they will take the Corvette V8 and shove it into a Miata. They'll shove it into a Honda S2000. Any car at some point has had a Corvette engine stuck into it because it's reliable, bulletproof pushrod motor. The parts are inexpensive. The labor is easy to do. You can make ridiculous horsepower in a car that sounds like a helicopter. So I would definitely have at least one of those as like the third car. And then I would definitely have another 60s, 70s car. It would probably be that Mustang I said. Like that would be a self-sacrifice because there are other cars I'd want just for me. But I love the idea of being able to take my friends to the beach so much that I would pick the 66 Mustang convertible, and I would drop like the EcoBoost V6, the turbocharged V6 out of the new Mustangs in one of those. So 300 horsepower, very tame.
I'm not hearing anything modern. I'm hearing nothing here has Android autoplay, right?
I mean, you can put that stuff in. You could build like a double DIN dash system. I mean, I've done it before with cars, and I've got friends who modernize it. You can put a tablet system in. One of my life coaches, he has a 77 slant nose 911 Porsche, and he modernized it. And he has a double DIN tablet system where one is like music control center, and then the other is touchscreen navigation and stuff. And it's built in seam. Like he's altered the a lot of the plastic and the the cabinetry or whatever inside the interior so to actually fit the tablet in there, and then built a new center console that looks like it was originally part of the Porsche. It's flush with all the lines and everything. It's just you don't notice it at first, and then you get in and you're like, oh wait, why is there a tablet in this car? Yeah.
Right. That's not stock.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's cool. Okay. I respect that. That's fine. You're also I'm not hearing a lot of off-roading from you, which is totally fine.
It's not my thing. Like I have nothing against SUVs. I just would never own one unless I had to. If anything, I'd have a truck at some point, right? Like I'd get like a Ford Ranger or a Toyota Tacoma. I don't need something as big as like an F-150, but if I had my dream car garage, I'm definitely doing housework and projects and DIY stuff and car stuff. I'd need a truck, and I'd get like a Tacoma. I used to be a Toyota technician, so like I'm gonna pick a Toyota.
Oh, nice, very good. Okay, car thing. All right, let's move on to some. I know people aren't expecting this, but let's turn around and let's talk about writing a little bit.
Sure.
I don't know why. But so I know I read First Binding recently. Love that book.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I needed to because I'm like, okay, we're gonna talk. I should know what I'm talking about, and liked it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But right off the bat, one of the first things that like sort of pours out of that book is this reverence you have for story and narrative and storytelling. And I have a bunch of sort of very vague questions about that. And I see that not only in the book, but I see it on your Twitter feed because I follow you on Twitter. I see a lot of your tweets. You're talking about stories and storytelling. Was that something that you specifically brought into First Binding? Is that something you feel is a theme throughout your writing and throughout your life? Or like what's the place that theme has for you?
It's definitely something that started in my life before my writing. And I wasn't aware of it. This is definitely one of those like therapy or becoming older points out. Because I grew up here with a lot of westernized myths, obviously on TV shows like Wishbone and
Mhm.
stuff. Reading the English epics and classics that were taught in school. And there was a point where I started talking to my mom about them, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we read this cool epic, and this happens to this." And she goes like, "That's very similar to this South Asian tale." And that happened a lot in the course of my life until I got older and got more interested in mythology and had the ability to research it, and then started saying, "Wow, why are there all these like famous archetypes and beats and tropes in Western stories that also exist in South Asian ones?" But I never learned that they were also in the South Asian ones. Like I had to go find that myself, and then see how many other cultures had the exact same thing. And I'm like, why aren't we taught this? Why aren't we taught like one variant of this myth that clearly has inspirations and influences around the world? And as I got older, I learned how much like Wheel of Time and so many other fantasy series had so many other Asiatic concepts and beliefs and things molded into them to flesh out their world building. And I was like, well, how come we don't ever hear the stories of like the cultures where a lot of those ideas come from, or they're also prominent in at least? And the idea specifically of stories being important was, I think, cultured by a lot of that in the background of my brain, because the Grave Report follows a structure where I wasn't consciously aware of the importance of this at the time. I was doing this because I felt it was a very good character tool, to make the character resonate and connect. But his stories are really his journals. Like the first book you get, it's kind of posited very clearly that he's writing his case files down. And I have similar themes about how every person is important. I've said the line in the Grave Report, and how they all have their own stories. Similar lines to the first binding, but he's doing this on a person-to-person basis because that series is about a soul who doesn't have a body of his own, and
Mhm.
every day he wakes up in the body of someone else killed by monsters. And part of each story is figuring out the identity and life of that person to find who could have killed them and what that monster was. So there is like a theme of like exploring identity in each book of there. And then the first binding definitely coalesced a lot of those themes into the overall idea of storytelling on the macro level, techniques and things from cultures and structures, um, beats, archetypes, and tropes that are all being discussed as well as deconstructed and meta referentialed throughout the series, and commented on. And then there's a granular personal level because Ari does that with other people, specifically ask them about their stories. We get into it. We
Yeah,
have nesting
yeah,
stories about individual characters as well as his. So the first binding is
yeah.
like almost like a PhD culmination attempt, I guess, by me to sort of reconcile all that themes from my life and then earlier works before I even realized I was doing it, and now do it with intention, to a different goal.
So did you bring that intention to this? Did you already have that at the as an intentional conscious thing when you were writing First Binding?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
because I noticed that like there are people who would write a storyteller and they just be a guy who lives a normal life and then he tells stories at the end of the day in front of the bar. But that's not Ari. Ari, the
yeah,
fact that he's a storyteller is embedded in his sort of practice of being a human being in many other ways. Like he
mhm,
acts like a storyteller when he's not telling stories.
yes,
Like what does he say? More listening than speaking. I
mhm,
think is one of my favorite. I don't know if that's a quote or like you write that somewhere in the first. I'm terrible
mhm,
with like specifics, but
yeah, and
but to
that one's
me
actually
that
repeated a lot,
yeah,
throughout the
okay, then
series.
that's why I
Oh, yeah, right,
remember it.
book 2's not out, sorry, yeah, yeah, oops, but
Oh, I
yeah,
haven't read book 2. Yeah, don't
yeah,
spoil it for me. But
yeah,
no,
that
but I mean, he's a storyteller. It's more than just he happens to tell stories,
mhm,
right? It's embedded in his character in a much deeper way, which but that was deliberate. That's something you came in
yes,
trying to do.
and that's
Yeah, okay.
exactly why the opening actually starts in a way that,
Oh,
both opposed and mirrored each other, which I talked to my editor about. Ari
yeah.
comes in very strong as a cocky performer within the first chapter, but that's only a fraction of the chapter if people make it past that. Um, so
Yeah,
part of that, it does have some like commentary. He's a foreigner first of all in another country that,
right,
as you go through, you kind of realize is xenophobic. So he has to. He's doing a job audition. He has to be the best of the best. He can't
right.
be blasé. He can't be meek. He can't be like lukewarm. So it does come off cocky, but immediately after he secures the job, um, the original audience or the three patrons who are sitting there drinking their afternoon away leave, Ari immediately deflates. The storyteller guys is gone, and immediately the first thing he does is ask the tavern keeper for his story. He goes
Okay.
from being a performer to the recipient. So within
The
the first
listener.
chapter, we get both sides of that, where it is
Yeah,
performance, and then he is the one being performed for, and then you, the audience, sees that too. You have Ari performing towards you, setting himself up as the storyteller, and you're getting a performance back, hearing a barkeeper tell a story. And I wanted to execute that within the first chapter to sort of set the subconscious promise that the audience is going to know what you're going to get, like, because you're not going to want to stick around if you don't like that. Like, this is what you're getting: a storyteller telling a story, and
yeah,
you're going to be
yeah.
hearing stories back.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of I love that opening for a variety of reasons. One of which is the dual work, right? You're teaching us something about Ari. He's a storyteller, and the stories are giving us the world building,
Mhm.
but we're not getting just an info dump, right? It's
Right.
because it feels like an info dump when it's serving one purpose, where we're
Yeah.
just getting background information. But by doing several things with the same story, we're learning something about who he is as a person while we're getting these background facts.
Mhm.
This is like what I would use if I was going to teach a class on how to do
Oh, thank you.
info dumps, right? Or not maybe info,
No,
not
you
info,
can say you can
how
call
to
them that in a
share the
way.
background, but
Yeah.
they're not. That's the thing, is they're not info dumps
Right.
because they're serving this
If they're
dual or
hidden
triple
in the nesting
purpose.
stories, yeah,
Yes,
then
yes,
the
yes,
more work you can make a scene or piece do,
yes.
the
Thank you.
more the more allowance the audience will give you to get away with stuff.
Yeah, by doing
Um,
multiple things. Yep.
yeah.
I love that. Love that. That was good stuff. And I just replayed my next question, which is just that the opening, and you're introducing the theme, because it's not just the background information, it's not just Ari's character, but it's the theme of storytelling that ties
Mhm.
the whole book together, and you're hitting us with all three at once,
Mhm.
and that's just good stuff. I don't. That's not even a question. I'm asking you and telling you something. I'm just that's not even a question. I don't know why I'm bothering you with this. Okay. Um, I have a bunch of questions that are related
Mhm.
about first binding, and you got to bear with me. So, okay, let me read my note. Okay, I have seen. I'm going to say, listen, lazy reviews of first binding saying it's a ripoff or of Name of the Wind, and I don't think it is. I know it's not. Let's put this change it. But I do want to say, like clearly, there's strong references to Name of the Wind and structurally in the book. So first of all, I'm I know you've talked about Rothfuss a little bit, but could you talk about like why did you start from, or I don't maybe start from is the wrong word, but why did you take cues from Name of the Wind? Why was it that that book in particular, did it fit what you already wanted to do? Was it just that you had an idea? Like, how did that happen? You know?
So part of it was definitely like giving nice nods, at least what I thought
Okay.
so towards it. And then there were themes in that, but there's also stuff from Wheel of Time, which I'm guessing hasn't gotten picked up on. But like I said earlier, when I started seeing how many structural things that like were noticed by me that also show up in other cultures, like other tropes and beats, and obviously most particularly the hero's journey, but not only that. And I've talked about this on Twitter before. Like the hero's journey is a reduction and a codification of larger stories down to like its core tropes, but it misses actually a lot of other shared tropes that cultures
Hmm.
have. And I kind of wanted to set this up in a way that would be familiar, but not, because it's actually mentioned in the books. Ari posits the theory. He does that like a lot of stories come from the same place or an
Hmm.
origin story,
Hmm.
and he's searching for that. And then I don't know if I can spoil it because the book's now 2 years old. But like near the end, he's talking to another person, a very wealthy, educated person, who also posits the same theory back. Like
Hmm.
it might be blasphemous in his culture to admit that. It's something that comes up. It's not a popular opinion, but he's like, I read all these stories and they have like similarities and themes that
The
come back.
the prince.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
when
yeah,
something
yeah.
happens to him later, but
Hmm.
yes, Ari has a conversation with the prince, who also posits the same theory. So that
Right.
that was structurally tied in, and my editors were okay with that because they knew that I was doing a certain commentary because they get the background outline of what I want to spoil. So I'm like, oh, this is referencing this, but it also shows up in this culture and this. Like the Magical Academy um, goes back not just to Earthsea, but like what I talked about. South Asia, and people don't know this. Ashrams were actual places, or ashram, if you Romanize it and say it in English, and that taught a huge like variety of things. Right, there were like academies, universities, as well as places for spiritual development and physical development. And a famous one was Nalanda, which is the world's oldest residential university. Like it's not up for debate. It is where students from across the world actually came. And I wanted to create this place of higher learning, to sort of nod to like everything from Harry Potter, Earthsea, Name of the Wind, and then have this place that serves as a function for, in a world where magic is really hard to do, there would be some formalized way to learn it. Like it's not just today. Throughout time and history, there's always been a place for people to pursue knowledge. Once we got to that point of civilization, that we could codify knowledge. Again, like
Right.
Nalanda is eons old. It was unfortunately destroyed, but they taught students from as far as Japan, which people don't know because Nalanda was Buddhist predominantly. And so, because of the spread of Buddhism across the Silk Road, there were philosophers predominantly and other scholars who actually came there to study. Like, there's records of Greek philosophers in India who stayed there like for ages, and they would
Mhm,
study
mhm.
and they would trade philosophy. And the ashram I have is sort of a similar sort of beat to that lets me tackle a lot of fantasy tropes that show up a lot, like
Right.
the rivalry between the rich kids. That's Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. That goes back to Earthsea. Ged, the protagonist, Sparrowhawk, has a rivalry with Jasper, who is the rich son of a High Lord. And
Mhm.
then Ari and Nitham. Nitham is the son of a king. That actually is a trope called aristocrats are evil. If you want like to just like
Okay.
yes, and usually you're dealing with like a baron or a smaller kind of nobility that's closer at hand to maybe
Right.
your protagonist situation, because a king is usually very remote and far away, right? Like let's say you write a fantasy and you pick the plucky orphan. It's very rare that orphan's going to be in proximity to a king, but what they might be closer to is a more local, smaller lord who rules over that domain, and they usually
Mhm.
you make them a prick, right? And then the reason for that is
Yeah.
you can critique or comment on social
Right.
political issues through the lens of this rich privileged person.
Sure.
But it also comes down to like everybody through high school needs a bully. I don't, not in real life, but like if you're gonna do it in a it does. And you could
No.
use that to discuss things. You could do societal clashes. You can create student tension.
Yeah, you're doing this. You're doing double work, right? You've got
Yeah,
you need an antagonist because
entire
if Ari had just sailed through school with high marks, it wouldn't have been much of a story, right? You
right,
would have
and
been you would.
it
So
wouldn't have focused on
you
other elements too. So
right.
Tales of Tremaine
But
folds a
you do
lot of stuff.
yeah
Um,
yeah oh yeah
it's a
it does
it's
it
a
really
frame narrative, but it's also picaresque, which is a Spanish genre of like you follow a roguish hero across their journeys. It can kind of be a grand adventure story. It's also what's known as a Bildungsroman, which is a German genre specifically that focuses on a young person's moral or spiritual education as they grow.
Mm,
So Ari needs like school challenges. He needs challenges as a kid where he's allowed to F up. He can be precocious or he could be selfish and then have some moment of, wow, I need to grow. Or maybe not grow, because some students unfortunately don't, and even adults don't, unfortunately. But then suffer consequences for that, right? Like in narrative, there has to be
well,
something. It's either I'm going to do this and I have a moment of character growth, or because I refuse to grow, I'm suffering consequences now, and the
I
audience will
mean
learn through that.
yeah, and he can take a beating or lose the girl, but not lose
Yeah,
the ring and have Sauron like conquer the world, right? Right. You need that into that the middle ground where you have consequences that aren't going to end the setting. So and I also I just want to point out that you're doing this lovely thing where you're saying something about storytelling in your story by the fact that you're reflecting structural elements from other stories,
yes, yeah, and
and
that's
and
common
then you're
tone too. So it makes
explicitly
it more
you're,
meta in a way.
yeah, that's exactly the word I wanted to get to, which is it's a very meta structure, and it's I appreciate that. I
Oh, thank
appreciate
you. Yeah.
when there's things I can reflect on and double back on that way. Um, Okay. So were you a huge? Okay. So again, I'm going to go back to Rothfuss because the closest structural comparison. I think if there's like if you do a 3 sentence summary of Name of the Wind and First Binding, they're going to sound similar. So was it were you a huge fan of that book? Were you not a fan of that book and you wanted to do something that did things differently? Did you mean First Binding as like a criticism of that book? What it could have
Oh
been if it had
no.
been better or
Oh no. So first thing, like I talked about with paying it forward with Jim and stuff, I was very fortunate to be mentored early on, and like no author is your competition, and I'm not here to critique them. This is a love letter to storytelling. Everything and everything I'm referencing is coming from a point of trying to do the multiple work I talked about, because I want to actually. I don't want to say decolonize. Like it's really aggressive. I wanted to share, like we said, like the shared elements of storytelling through, in this case, a more South Asian lens, which is why it's set on the Silk Road, to show
yeah.
people like a lot of the stuff I think that they familiarized or internalized, especially through '90s fantasy, which was very like the way of what Western '90s fantasy looked like was it was very like high medieval European inspired, but then it would take elements of Eastern cultures for like exoticism, like resting its magic system and some of the world building in those elements. And I kind of wanted to show them redone through a more Asiatic world. Which is why there's other Silk Road countries along there. Like book 2, you're going to travel to an analog of the Middle East, where, of course, different world building and everything, but paying nods to that love and that culture along the road in maybe more positive light, because there has been a lot of negative, unfortunately, through the '90s of stereotypes where, like for example, Islam, a foreign nation is usually in a lot of '90s fantasies. It's some kind of weird amalgamation of Islamic culture, but it's sometimes very negative. Um, so this was more like, I don't want to say criticism, but a chance to correct some things and show. For one example, like I have the idea of also tinkers in my world, but what people don't realize is that the tinkers came out of the Ramani, and the Ramani traditionally come out of Punjab. They come out of India. They were a group of people that migrated out, and you can Google and look this up. And unfortunately, it's also why the slur that stuck to them that begins with G, that's actually truncation for Egyptians. And it's because people throughout Europe thought they were Egyptian, not Indian. And the Tinkers, particularly, there's a caste of people who, by work and trade, actually are Tinkers. And I actually used their Indian name as well in the first binding, called Gadi Lohar, which translates to like wagon iron, or vehicle with iron, because these were actually wagon living merchant people who would go around fixing metalwork. So what they would do is they would actually tinker and mend knives, mend pots. They were essentially like mobile blacksmiths. They still exist to this day by caste and trade. Some of them have modernized, like they'll pull like a cart with like a small truck or something. But in the actual book and in the actual history, they actually used to live in wagon homes that were pulled by oxen. And I use that exact same reference, and I actually have them announced both as Tinkers and Gadi Lohar. So there's a lot of like trying to, I guess, like break through the tropes and show like the Asiatic history of them. Even though it's a secondary world, I don't have India 1-to-1. I really wanted to show, I think, a lot of fantasy elements. I don't think people still to this day know where they come from structures, beats, fantasy tropes and archetypes, because they've only ever seen it presented one way over and over and over. Like Name of the Wind has Tinkers, the Wheel of Time has Tinkers. There are a lot of like use of Ramanai people, but only with their Western heritage, not older Eastern heritage. And I wanted to start showing all of that, because South Asia is a very, very diverse culture that has had a lot of different castes, a lot of different people come out of it, a lot of cultural practices come out of it over eons. There's also a nod to where somebody criticized my, I have what's called Erasmus or Erasmus, depending on what accent you want to use in the word, steel. And they thought it was Valyrian steel. And it was actually me trying to explain that Damascus steel. But if you look up the history of Damascus steel, people don't know it actually came from India, from what's known as wood steel. And there was naturally occurring steel there because of high pressure, mountain ore and steel that comes out of the rivers was exposed to carbon as well, which is how you get steel, iron, and carbon. But the interesting situation was the original wood steel was an alloy found because it had carbon nanotubes. So there was gaps in it, which is now today what blacksmiths do is they actually fold in the steel over and over and over. They use high carbon steel and they fold it over and over to get the same like feather pattern. But that was naturally occurring in the ore when they found it. So they were able to smith Damascus steel weapons. And eventually the trade of that did end up sending up in Damascus in the Middle East. But if you look up Damascus steel and the origin, wood steel, it comes from South Asia. So you're going to see this in book 2 more, where Ari comes across a piece of Erasmus, and it starts getting more into the lore of this. I wanted to start taking what's really cool and popular in a lot of fantasy and start to broaden, I guess, like the idea behind like where it comes from and showing it through other lenses. Hopefully, in the idea people start asking more questions and start like seeing how similar but also diverse fantasy can be, and where a lot of the information and stuff comes from. Like the famous show Avatar: The Last Airbender. People don't realize still to this day that that entire concept is South Asian. The word avatar comes from South Asia, and it's pronounced avtar. The very idea of coming from the epics of originally what it would be is a god character would or god would reincarnate themselves into like a mortal form that would be their avatar. Like a next birth, and then do great things in the world, preserve justice, fight in the time of war. There is a story similar to the Armageddon story with Christ's return in South Asia. The Avatar Vishnu, I believe, coming back as Kalki, who is similar like a Christ figure coming back at the last end of days to save the world. These are beats I wanted to try to put throughout the first binding. There is a scene that deals with the virginal birth of a godlike character. And the reason that I had this one do double duty intentionally was on the surface, it seems like the Christ story. But in my story, it's a solar deity that is behind the virginal birth. And that's actually nodding to a South Asian story, which is Surya, the sun god, and the princess Kunti, who have the exact same interaction where Surya gives her a boon, which is a virginal birth. She gives birth to a child of a god through virginal means. And also in the original story, not the variation that I wrote of it, she ships the child downriver in a basket, which is Moses before the Moses story.
You're talking about my people.
Yeah. And this is something that, like I said, I wanted to comment on. There's a lot more other beats, like I said, some that reference other fantasies, because they're also historical beats, some that reference actual mythology, but mythology that exists in many cultures. I'm trying to use beats and story points that the more you peel away, the more you realize like they're not just one thing for that intentional idea that Ari's talked about the history of repetitive and similar stories. And there's other craft reasons for that too that are spoilers, but
because speaking as a white person not steeped in South Asian culture or really anything but like modern American culture, like I'm seeing these elements from South Asian in First Binding. I mean, the most obvious is like the caste system, which I'm like, okay, I know where this is from, but I feel like I'm missing other places where there are things in there that are actually references to Desi Influences that I'm like, I don't even know that's a Desi influence because I don't know the R original stuff.
Right.
So
And
I
I'm
think
hoping that people start looking into that more. Fortunately, one of the editors and industry people at Tor is also South Asian, so like they've been getting it, and I've had South Asian people find the influences. So like it goes back to I'm hoping the multiple duty I'm doing with certain nesting stories and themes catches different people. Like there's actual like pseudo recipes put in that are like favorite South Asian dishes or desserts as well. They are story culture nods. Mahir from Fantasy Book Critic, who's South Asian, has picked up on some of the he's picked up on some of the South Asian references and stuff and nods. And an example of this using Western works would be the idea of like a group of people who are set to affect fate. And we can start with Tolkien and the Hobbits, where they weren't predestined to, but they set like this adventuring band archetype leaving from home. And then we have that in Wheel of Time with the Taverin, who in that case it is specifically set. But people forget Stephen King's Dark Tower also has a group of kids like that called Quartet, which is the exact same thing. The Quartet and the Ka is the group of people like sort of chosen and meant to affect fate. And then both series have magical horns where there's one in Wheel of Time which does what a lot of magical horns, if you go back to our history, do, which is like they bring back the dead. They also like, can sunder your enemy, raise spirits, and rally you. And then in Dark Tower, there's the horn of Arthur Eld, and Eld is the archaic word for old, so Arthur of Old. And a lot of Wheel of Dark Tower is actually a nod to a poem called The Song of Roland, which is why even the protagonist, who is a descendant of the Knights Templar, is named Roland, Roland Deschain. And there's a horn in that poem that is blown. It's an Oliphant horn, which is an elephant horn, which essentially wins the day in the big battle. And what people don't know if they haven't read the Lord of the Rings books, which influenced both of these series, Wheel of Time and Dark Tower, is that originally Aragorn summons the army of the dead with a horn. That's not in the movies, but Elrohir, who is the son of Elrond, gives Aragorn a silver horn that he has to blow to summon the armies of the dead. So there's that like shared theme that actually shows up within fiction, referencing itself, but then also referencing tropes and beats that come from older mythology. Because there's Galahorn, the Norse horn, South Asian culture, the same thing, the horns that magically you blow and you summon an army. And it's a very iconic piece of like, the day is in trouble. We need some kind of allyship, and you blow a horn, and reinforcements are there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of stuff like that gets overlooked, but like, there's a lot of beats that I think people are missing still. That when they go back and look, you'll see like there's like many more stories happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. Like, I felt like I was missing connections, which I guess I'll figure out over many years and reading a lot of tweets from a lot, which is fine. I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just like I don't know where this is from. Like there's a lushy in there, and I'm like, is that a lassi? Is that just a mango lassi, or am I just am I just missing that that the lushy is a word in another country, and I'm just an idiot and I didn't know that.
That was literally mango lassi.
I'm reading that, and I'm like, but my stepdaughter's favorite drink is a mango lassi. So
Yep.
Yeah,
like I got in trouble for putting the recipe for a piece of rolled fruit leather because they're like, this is just a fruit roll up, and I had to explain like, yes, but also that was a real snack though. Like people don't know in desert countries they would take apricots and figs or prunes and they would roll them out and dehydrate it and keep flattening it, and they would dehydrate it until it became a piece of fruit leather, and you would just roll it up. Like it was just natural dehydrated fruit. Like that was something you would take as desert food to munch on because there's still some moisture still left, but not to let it rot. And it still has nutrients in it, and you could just chew on it. And it's better than like tack, which was sailor's bread in Europe, which was dehydrated sawdust, essentially. Like no one wants to eat that. Like sailors hated eating it versus like, wouldn't you rather have like a dried piece of fruit to munch on?
So you claimed earlier in this interview that you're not like academically oriented, but I feel like you've somehow, despite that, managed to acquire a large amount of knowledge. And Kay from, I know you know Kay, I know you were on her show like a few days
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, she was super
Um,
sweet, lovely. Yeah.
yes, oh, I love Kay. But I posted on Twitter, like, anyone have any questions for Ronnie? And I had no intention of using any of them, but she asked, how does he tackle research? So I'm wondering the same thing. And you clearly are much more knowledgeable than the typical person about mythology, and like, how do you go about? I mean, and you claim not to be academic, so I'm going to assume you didn't get a PhD at Oxford in comparative mythology,
That
or
costs
that'd
money.
probably be in your
That's whatever I
bio
would have
if you
studied.
had.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
so
just
how do you? I'm not saying you need a PhD in comparative mythology from Oxford. Clearly, you've learned this stuff, is what I'm saying, in a practical way. But how do you go about acquiring this depth of knowledge, or how did you?
uh
Or how
well,
do you? I know it's continuing.
so this is within arm's reach of what I'm currently reading right now, but like I do have a massive monster mythology
Okay.
folklore budget that I have allocated for books. Like I go through books everywhere. I actually do reach out to universities and stuff to see if professors have already done the work that I can go back and read and compare, because a lot of professors are very sweet where they will just share their research with you, and then obviously because it's academic settings, they reference their resources so you can go check those, and you can just go down a rabbit hole. There's a lot of great YouTube out there, but you got to be careful with YouTube because yeah, anybody can
Yeah,
start a channel
yeah.
and say anything, and if you
Oh,
don't,
I have.
like, right, okay, but you
You're
know
on
what I mean,
one.
like
Yes,
with
yes,
prescriptive advice, and like other YouTubers are
yes,
really
yes.
good where they'll reference like, okay, I read this epic poem, this translation by this person, and they also are very honest about these things are being currently still debated by academics. These are agreed upon, and then a lot of cross referencing. Comparative mythology is definitely what I love studying, so it's by no means maybe an expert in any one specific one. Um, because of that, I do know a lot about very certain cultures, which is where I'm keeping most of Tales of Tremaine relegated to. And those are cultures that were influenced by Proto-Indo-European that came out of that.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
Indian, Norse, like Balkan and Slavic. There is obviously the Iranian, Persian, and then Japanese and some other cultures because of folklore, not necessarily mythology, although there's some overlaps in mythology there, but that's folklore because that was actually affected by the spread of Buddhism. So
Hmm.
there's some
Hmm.
historical analog over there too. So a lot of my research comes through reading um, certain histories of different cultures and then looking at the stories told at those times, because stories are where you find a lot more of the similarities than anything else. Stories were the original things that traveled, and in fact were honestly, like, I mean, it's fan fiction. There was fan fiction even back then where it seems impolite to say, and I don't mean it in that light, but where a lot of the similarities of stories might have actually come from. Just the idea of someone liking that story and going like, well, this is how our culture interprets it, or our spin on it, or even just a storyteller taking the idea and reperforming it to a local
Sure.
audience, going like, they wouldn't want to hear it this way, they'd want to hear it this way,
Let's
which are
say
all
King
themes.
Arthur did that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, like Beowulf and the Norse epics, right? Like the English poems and the Germanic Norse poems. Like, there's a lot of similarities in between them. Like Fafnir shows up in the German and the British legends as well. And then like Fafnir is quite literally small, or Smaug is Fafnir. In the Hobbit, like Tolkien takes a lot from the Eddas
Oh,
as well as the English poems. Um,
yeah.
the actual plot of like the One Ring comes from like Finnish legends.
Oh, I don't know
Yeah.
if I knew that. That's
So
cool.
there's a
Yeah.
play called Just Ring the Nibelung, which was written by a man named Wagner, which is a story about the One
Yeah,
Ring.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's also based off of
I've
Finnish
heard of
legends.
Wagner. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an epic called the Kalevala. I'm probably saying it wrong, but if you spell it like Kleva, it'll show
Okay.
up. And yeah, essentially it's a story about, in this case, the dwarves make a ring instead of Sauron that can give you dominion over the world, or the power to take over the world. And if you let people get it, they can ruin the world or destroy it.
Nice. Well, that's not. I see the connection. Right. Right. So you're going beyond Wikipedia search hunts, and
Oh yeah,
you're reading like academic works from like college professors on mythology. Do you make a point of seeking out books written by people from other South Asian authors in order to pull out some of these elements as well?
yeah. I try reading as much mythology as I can from them, but also with a grain of
Okay.
salt, because like anywhere today, there's a grain of, unfortunately, people wanting to misrepresent myths for sociopolitical agendas. Um, we've seen this with like the advent in any country with, like, let's say, the rise of nationalism, where Nazi Germany, for example, co-opted a lot of like Norse, Germanic, and
Hmm.
pagan beliefs, and they also twisted them. And you know, to serve certain political functions, and that's not right. And unfortunately, that can happen in any country. Indian mythology is extremely nuanced and complex and wide. The cosmology that they have is massive, and there's been different eras, right? You have the Vedic period, and then you have Hindu, and then other cultures that have come out of that over that time, and there are different interpretations of the myths as well as different language takes on the epics. Like there's a Tamil version, Sri Lankan version of like Mahabharata and the South Asian epics, as well as the Hindu versions. There are small notable details in there which have led to debates, and then the breaking down the nature of the debates has to be done very carefully, because there are clearly people who are doing an academic debate, and then some who are using it to push religious or political beliefs through the debate.
Have you gotten flack from people in India over your portrayal of the sort of negative portrayal of the caste system? I'm asking because very recently on Twitter, Gurav, whose last name I'm not going to remember, but I know you know him. He was talking about how he was getting flack from people about sort of negative reactions to his negative portrayal of the caste system, which and he was like, I can't believe I'm dealing with this. I'm wondering if you've seen that yet, or maybe you're somewhat insulated living in this country and not being as exposed in India to that. Or
there's been some that was direct. It never. I don't know how bad Gurav got it, so I don't want to comment or misrepresent.
No, I don't want you to talk about his experience, but talk about yours.
Yeah. I got some direct DMs on Facebook early on. But I also did something where my world is a secondary world, so the caste system is different. I'm not analoging actual Indian castes. I'm still talking about the exact same problems, but I think, and this is still unfortunate because it shouldn't happen, because this has been the part of the problem with the caste system. It can be used after people self-identify with it too much to punch down and hurt people, as well as create positions of privilege, which is exactly what I am commenting on in Tales of Tremaine, and I am critiquing that actively. But because I didn't use actual one-to-one Indian caste system by name, maybe I didn't get as much as Gurav is getting. I still had the very similar ideas, though, of like a priest, very well connected religious caste, versus Ari, who comes from so low a caste that his caste doesn't even like get any consideration at all. It's not considered a caste really at all. Just he's essentially equivalent to untouchable.
Right. Unsullied, I think, right?
That's the term I use. Yes.
Yeah. No, but that's the beauty of SFF, right? You can take this real life thing and, like, call it something slightly different. It's like the Star Trek. I always love the way Star Trek played with that. And this is before your time, but you have the green people and the red people, and they have racism, and it's like, well, that's that doesn't get the people's defenses up, because like we don't have green people here, so they're not talking about our racism. They're talking about something completely separate, and you can maybe get them to think a little bit,
right? Because X-Men was quite literally a commentary on the civil rights movement, and people continue to miss that.
Yeah, and now they're like, why is X-Men so woke? And you're like, did you actually read any of the old X-Men? Like, this isn't as new as you think it is, guys. Anyway, that's a different conversation. Okay, so are there any other this? I think you've addressed this question, but are there other Desi influences on Tremaine that you think people have, like me, have probably missed?
So part of the structure, not the obvious frame narrative. I think enough people have Googled and looked up that originated in South Asia. Some of the rhyming schemes are heavily couplets and quatrains with South Asian poetry. Ran that way, including the epics, but a lot of the philosophy that undertones the book is South Asian, and then also other Asiatic cultures that maybe traded philosophy that later got cooperated by India, or went back out and just developed as an advent of it through Buddhism, for example. There are South Asian meditative practices tied intrinsically into the magic system. That was just as a nod. So the candle and the flame, which also shows up in as a variant in the Wheel of Time, for example, that's trakta, which is a South Asian meditative practice where you look at a candle. It's called candle gazing, and the idea is to like be able to visualize the flame here, where your third eye would be, and it's a focus exercise of concentration. And I use that exactly to help teach Ari that focus when he first is introduced to the idea of the bindings to build his focus. Then he later associates it with it on another level, because candles are also intrinsically important in the world mythology I created. And there's a reason for that as well, but it's also tying and knotted to that meditative practice, because magic in the South Asian epics, it's like the life of being an ascetic. It's worked at. You meditate on it too. You don't just perform it. You practice it. You study it. You have to meditate and focus on it. There's a lot of stories about sages trying to meditate in mountains for like 1,000 years, trying to get concentration. And if you ruin it, you're cursed. Like you do not break a sage's concentration, which is why there's also that point where I discussed in the magic system. If you don't step out of the bindings properly, it can damage your mind. Like you don't drop your concentration. This is a very powerful thing you're doing. It requires all of your faith and will and your mental cognitive ability to do it. And then one thing I had to fight to retain was the pacing of Ari's tutelage under Marab, his teacher in book 1, because it was a very long training montage, and
Mhm.
people in the industry didn't like that at first. And I was trying to explain that that's setting up a master-student dynamic, which is very big in Asian cultures, not just Indian. The idea, like a master, is also kind of like a parent, and there is a lot of philosophy and life discussion during that, and a lot of back and forth. It's a very big part of a lot of like old heroic epics and stories. You have a master, and you learn and grow with them, right? It's exactly like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, if you want a Western analog. And
I mean,
I wanted to foster that relationship.
I mean, it's coming from Asia, but we also, I mean, if
Yeah,
you're American, you've seen it in a million martial arts movies,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Like it's not, it didn't start in those martial arts movies. That's not where it's from, but
Yeah,
it's you know, it's familiar to us, and this is what I'm talking about, right? Like again, it's like as a white guy who's not steeped in this mythos, like some of these things are familiar to me, but I don't know where they
right,
originated, right? I'm like, I don't know, maybe this was invented in 1960. How do I know? You know, unless
right,
so I dig a little deeper and like, okay, that didn't start in Hollywood. That's not where
right,
that's
right,
not where the
right.
grounding really was. And it's like that's great stuff. So I think I had this question for later, but I have to ask it now. So I'm recognizing a lot of the things in the magic system, but the one thing that I felt I didn't recognize where it's from is the folds,
Oh,
because I don't know where that's from. Like that didn't strike me as familiar or similar to anything else I'm aware of. Is
mhm.
that like an invention? Is that
Oh,
coming from something that you had in mind, or a reflection of something? No pun intended.
so that
Where
was
the folds come from?
that's a mix of a few specific things. So there's the idea in Indian cosmology, and not just only that, of
Okay.
the idea of other realms and other partitions of reality. Like in Michael Moorcock's world, and then later even in The Witcher, they have the convergence of spheres, right? Overlapping
Hmm.
realities
Hmm.
that mix, that fold on top one another. In Indian reality, we have cosmology. We have the lokas, which are alternate realms and dimensions and realities, like the way you have the Norse 9 realms.
Hmm.
Exactly the same thing. And when I was first coming up with how you enact the mental space of that, this became very centric on the idea of other spaces, right? And then I was like, what about the internal space within oneself? And I started going through the meditative action of, because I had the magic system in part. I didn't have all the terms, but I had how the magic system
Yeah,
functioned.
yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, if you're imprinting your images one after another, it's kind of like, and I put this actual exercise in the reference in the first binding of folding a piece of paper with the same like ink
Yeah.
blot over and over mirrored. And I was like, oh, folding. I'm like, okay, so if I have these other
Ah,
folds of personal and physical space, I'm like, what if everything becomes the idea of folds? And then that becomes a centric thing of, you have the idea in other cultures, if I look at it as folded reality, different folds of them, and sometimes they overlap, then those are external spaces you can occupy. Why not have a magic system that does the same thing inside yourself, where you are folding internal, in this case, mental space along with belief? And it's why that whenever I have Ari going into the folds, there's also sometimes the commentary intentionally over and over of the doubling of the space, and I reiterate the imagery over and over. There is a lot of conscious repetition focus on that, and that's because it's driven by that same idea.
that's great. And it gives you this sort of a shorthand for understanding sort of, I don't want to say level, but the ability,
Yeah,
the
yeah, because I
skills
did
of
add
the
a
wizarding.
quantitative element to it. Like, how far can you
That
fold your mind?
that's
Yeah,
the word, the quantitative element that I was looking for and did not say. That's great. And that helps the reader sort of, oh, this guy can do 20 folds, that guy can do
yeah,
40. Oh, he's someone we need to worry about. And so it's doing I like this notion of double duty or triple
yeah.
duty when you have a thing. So it's another one. That's good stuff. Okay, so it's not all right. That's perfect. Going through my questions, we're answering stuff out of order. That's totally fine. Um, oh, so I have another question. So clearly, I want to go back to Rothfuss for just a minute. Did the Doors of Midnight? Were you thinking about Wise Man's Fear when you structured that book, or did you leave that behind, or those connections and do your own thing in terms of like
Uh,
the very rough outline of the story or the plot?
Uh, I don't really know. I
Okay,
had when I first
okay,
wrote the books, that I turned in a 3-book outline to Tor and Go lengths, and I just followed what was on there. Like
Okay.
I have no idea how people are going to interpret it.
So you're
There's a
clearly
famous
not
quote.
following him because his third book's not out yet. So there's no way you could have used, right? Because I was thinking, like, are you waiting for his third book before your third book? Because that's going to be a rough ride for all of us.
No, no, book 3. I don't want to comment because like it feels like it's going to disparage. Like, I don't like doing that to authors. Like this is part of the reason is like he's gotten so much crap, and then George R. R. Martin and stuff. And like I said, I don't like doing this to authors. Like it's just not right and wrong. It's just wrong because everything becomes a giant dog pile. But
you had your own notion of how the structure should move forward. That's what I'm asking.
Because
that's totally no comment on what he was doing. That's fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Tor was pretty insistent on that, and I think it's because of, unfortunately, the history of authors with unfinished series. So they're like, "Can you tell us what the plans are for the series?" And I gave them the first 3, and I told them the layout overall for the 12 books I intend. And and they're like, "Okay, well, cool."
Okay, nice. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but have you signed with them for 12 books?
No, right now I don't know of anyone who's getting a 12-book contract. I think the last big multi-deal contract confirmed was, I believe it was actually Brandon for Stormlight, where he got the whole series signed off.
Yeah, right they now have to tell Brandon whatever you want, buddy, right? They don't have a choice.
Right now, it's really common to do books in 3, like chunks of 3, and get renewed. And I think someone like 5 has been done recently. I'm not sure. So that one, I can't comment, but I know someone who at least their series was 5 books. Maybe they got renewed on book 3. So I can't comment 100%, but like their series was 5 and they got that renewed for that.
But they bought your first 3 having a notion that this was a 12-book series. That's phenomenal. I mean, that's because we're often told not to do that, and I don't really want to get too far in the weeds on how to publish because that's a different podcast, and I don't care. Maybe I don't. That's not the wrong. It's not that I don't care. It's that it's not my primary interest. But okay. So we talked about Lushy. We talked about this. Okay. So you've discussed how Ari is someone who suffers from depression, and you've talked about your own depression. I don't want to get into that at any depth, but did you? Can you? I want to talk a little bit more about that, but I especially thinking of, did you write Ari and then go, hey, this guy's got depression, and I didn't even know, and that explains a lot of his behavior, because I did this. I wrote a character and people like, he has PTSD, and I'm like, yeah, he does. I didn't even realize that. I just wrote him in a way that seemed natural to me for the character, and I didn't put a name on it because I didn't know. But did you start with, I'm going to write about a guy with depression, or did you write him and then come up with, this is actually depression, or like what was the order and what you were trying to do there?
No, I already knew Ari had depression when I wrote him. It's very why early on, like immediately in the opening scene, where once his role as storyteller is gone, he visibly deflates. He doesn't want to talk about himself. Those are things I've done, and sometimes if it's a really bad day for me and I'm in a public situation, the yay therapy and self-reflection, right? A lot of those are my tics of how I might interact, and like people with depression sometimes don't want to take up what they presume is space in a situation, so you might shrink, you don't become conversational. A lot of those cues, and there's a reason, obviously, like Ari has depression that's also exacerbated by past and then later on life events. So those some of those elements are going to be central to his character story, but it's something I wanted to show a lens through because it's something I've struggled with, so I know I can comment and talk about it. And show that in a fantasy setting. And then a lot of the other characters have other degrees of neurodivergency or mental illness. Krisham, who is a student in the university, has a sort of magically altered and self-inflicted case of DID, or dissociative identity disorder. Emmy has PTSD, as well as sort of, I don't want to say schizophrenia, but she has a unfortunately very damaged perception of reality, which you learn more about in book 2. Like why she's in that place, and everyone in the crow's nest has suffered some form of mental illness that can be self-inflicted, which is why the bindings are so dangerous. And that gets into the books as well, where if you are forcing yourself to believe things to a degree where you can actually use them to affect reality, and there's no room for error, how can that not affect you back in long term? Because your entire perception is quite literally changing. Then you are convincing yourself you can alter and interact with the laws of reality around you to affect a certain outcome. That's not normal. And if that becomes
Right.
part of your base programming, that's going to affect how you perceive every other thing.
Yeah.
Every bit of
Yeah.
Ari's life is coded into him. There's something that I think some people have figured out. Like Ari in the past, he's not a bad person. The reason he's very reactive to things is because he grew up in survival mode. He's
Right.
somebody who was very poor in a poverty situation where he was abused even in his home by some of the
Mhm.
people through the system of casteism. And then he loses his home and he's immediately on the streets in a family where he's supposed to steal to survive, and he's bullied by another kids of another rival gang. So at no point has he known normal like self-regulation and stability. So if something can be perceived as a threat or it's not safe, it's immediately worst case situation for him. So it's why
Right.
he might take bullying at the ashram as a life and death situation and he overreacts. But that's actually normal for somebody who's never had like a life where they're not been in survival mode,
Right.
where if he doesn't take a threat seriously and it becomes a threat, that could get him killed. That's his prior past life of thinking. Um, so there's a lot of different stuff like that that's come out of either my life or stuff I've noticed with mental illness that I don't see get represented uh, all that much in fantasy.
And you're doing that double duty again, right? You've got this chance to talk about mental illness in various ways and talk about people, how people are affected by trauma in various ways, but while also having the in world effect of you have this beautiful way of there's a price to magic, which everyone
Yeah,
wants to see, right? No one wants to see the super powerful wizards and they're just fine, right?
yeah,
There's no cost, right? Their life drains away or there's something, but and the whole you just get tired is I guess overused. But here with the crow's nest, you get this very nice like immediate early introduction to the bindings are great, but you
yeah,
know,
yeah, and it's
and,
why they've also
and
fallen out of practice. Like the teacher doesn't want to teach them. That's something that comes up in book one and book
yeah,
two. Is
he's
he's
not entirely okay.
yeah. Not only is he not okay, but he's witnessed the
Right.
unfortunate reactions to students of his. Like this
Yeah.
is a system that breaks more people or more people quit than succeed with it. That's already not
Right.
like great.
Yeah. Yeah. So well done. Well done. Okay. Um, depression. All right. I saw you tweet a while ago. I'm going to leave the Chronicles of Tremaine. I think I've mostly gone through I am sure I have more questions, but I'm not going to remember them, and I didn't write them down. Um, you tweeted a little while ago about wanting to do a Desi themed superhero, and I want to know if anything came of that, or if you're still
Uh
working on it. As someone who writes a Desi themed superhero himself, right or
uh
wrong.
so unfortunately nothing came of it yet. I did
Okay.
write it. So
Oh.
what I did was a comic pitch was the project. We drafted out 5 issues for like a season one of a comic, and then I
Ah.
drafted out the follow. I think up to if you did 3 series or like one arc, 2, 3, that was a full outline. And a comic publisher actually wanted to acquire it and take it to editorial and the whole thing. And then I don't know what happened. It just I never heard back. I met with them in person. They wanted to move forward. I just never got the contract. Never heard anything. But it was a Indian superhero teenager story actually. So because I wanted to tackle a young hero who also still has to balance school life, and that was going to let me also do a commentary on Desi culture. I don't think a lot of people still get to have, which is the home life thing of someone growing up. So this was going to be someone where she had to balance her school life and her and the different cultural family background life while also trying to be a superhero in high school. And I thought that offered like the best way to do all of that. Like you get the adult adventures of what an adult has to go through at an earlier time because as a teenager you're transitioning into adulthood anyways, but that's a lot to bear with as a teenager. But she's also from a culture that at times can be very restrictive and a lot of weighty expectation. And it prompted in the original discussion when I was creating it the internal expectation of she has her parents' wishes to fulfill what they want for her, which is a very Asiatic thing, and then she has the wishes of herself as an individual. But then there's also
Hmm.
now that
Hmm.
she steps up to being a superhero, there's a societal expectation of what they
Hmm.
demand or want out of her as a superhero. And how do you meet all of them and reconcile with them as someone who's younger? Um, and I thought that was a cool idea to tackle because essentially it's doing something of what I've also done with Tales of Tremaine, but just from a superhero angle.
Right. Right.
Um, and it modernizes it, so hopefully modern DC people can see themselves in it. But I have no idea what's going to happen. I get the rights back from the submission August 8th, and we'll see if my new agent can do something with it. I don't know. Everything
Okay.
it was like 100% ready to go, and then just I never heard words. So it's
Did you have it at some point? Did you have like an artist, or did they have an artist attached to the project, or was this earlier than that?
this is earlier than that, I would say, because they wanted to
Okay.
buy, and they already had a production plan what they were going to do though, but I don't think they picked a name. But they were ready to offer a contract, so it was weird. It was like we were at acquisitions. They talked to me in person of here's how we would do it over 6 months of the development cycle. Like here's how we're going to do the art. Here's how we're going to like get pre-orders. So they had a business plan. I don't know if they picked an individual artist or if I could have even recommended one. I think that would have been something we discussed when we were signing contracts, but that part never happened. So
okay, I have to ask: have you seen the Ms. Marvel show?
I did. I saw the first season. I don't know how many they're on now, unless they.
I think just one. You saw it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Then yes.
The story continues in a way in the movie. Captain Marvel 2 has her as a main player. So there's more, but not that much more.
That, unfortunately,
that's okay. I don't know if that's unfortunate. You might be okay.
Okay. I don't know if I'm gonna lose my nerd credit. I've fallen off like I haven't kept up with every Marvel movie since life and the obligations of the books and stuff. Like I just finished up the last stuff. I need to start book 3, so I just want to I want to meet because those are contracts, right? Those are legally binding. Seeing a Marvel movie isn't. So I'm really behind on the shows and everything. So I apologize.
I'm not criticizing you, but Ms. Marvel addresses some of the themes you were talking about, and it's just
right. Yeah.
You'd want to sort of see what they do. I think would be interesting. Sam is saying how Never Have I Ever on Netflix was a view of Desi culture. I like that show quite a bit. I watched that with my wife, and then Ms. Marvel and the Marvels. I'm the one person who loves the Marvels. I like the Marvels a lot. I don't know if I loved it, but I did like the movie. But Ms. Marvel I thought was quite good. Are capes just cloaks for the modern era? I wrote that note after.
Yes.
Okay. I read your essay on I think it was FanFi Addict about what is it, candles, capes, and swords, and I was candles, cloaks, and swords, right? And I was thinking of cloaks. I was like, oh, cloaks are kind of like capes.
Oh yeah, I mean they are the outermost garment you wear. Now they've become symbolic, but like Batman's cape or Superman's cape are still symbols. And in the case of Batman's, like his capes usually have utility as well. And then mythology, the cloak usually was given by there's a famous trope called boon of the goddess, and that happens when you usually meet a goddess. There's actually a trope called meeting the goddess, and sometimes it's also stacked with the temptress, which is a trope that actually happens in Rothfuss's work, as well as Gene Wolfe's in a bunch, where you essentially meet a fairy queen in the West. And this goes all the way back to the early stories of meeting a nymph from the Greek epics. And they serve the role of a goddess, sometimes like a magical supernatural being. And when you leave their company, you get a gift. Usually, it's the one piece of you've left the world of normalcy. You go to some glade. The story of Thomas the Rhymer does this, where this is an old Scottish ballad where he meets the Queen of Elfland, who is a fairy queen, right? And he gets gifts. He gets clothing. He gets the gift of prophecy, a tongue that can never lie. There's also the history of getting magical cloaks, like a cloak that saves you from drowning, a cloak of invisibility. The most modern famous representation of this would be, where it's multiple, is I'll use the movie versions, but Frodo meeting Galadriel, where he meets her. This is after they escape from the Balrog and the Mines of Moria, and they come to a magical woodland realm, in which there's a scene which is the idea of the temptress, where Frodo is being tempted by Galadriel to give up the ring. Not overt in her case. She's not forcing him to or trying to seduce him to. It's just she is the player of it, because he just saw what happens if he fails. If he fails the quest to destroy the ring, everything he loves could be destroyed, and he doesn't feel strong enough. And the temptation to give it to a powerful elf queen in this case is very appealing. She's being tempted to turn to take the ring in the hopes that, like Gandalf, she'll use it for good, but she knows it could undo her, and she resists that temptation. And then in leaving her company, we get what is the boon of the goddess, where she gives the company different gifts. Like Gimli gets the 3 hairs, and there's a whole significant importance of that from the Silmarillion of why that's important. But then Frodo and the hobbits get the cloaks that can hide themselves, that shield them or make them invisible. And then they also get the light of Elendil, that phial, which is a magical light source. And this is similar to stuff that happens with Odysseus. Most epic heroes at some point meet the goddess archetype, and it's a moment of magic, and you're supposed to leave with something really, really cool. Some kind of gift.
Now, does Ari have a magic cloak or something? There's references to it in the first half, and then I somehow lost track of it in the second half of the first binding.
I have answered and not answered that in the books. It's intentional.
Okay. Okay.
In his legends, yes, there's a lot of references to him having magic cloak. It is implied that his current red cloak is also magic.
Okay.
I'm personally not gonna answer that, but the answers are there in the books. Book
That's fair
two,
enough.
book two answers that in the past. It definitely
Okay.
will address that 100%. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in book two. You will learn
Okay.
more about the idea of magic cloaks.
All right, then I will have to be patient, which is fine. Totally fine. And when does book 2 come out? I had this written down.
Next month, actually, this day. It's August 13th. In the
August
US,
13th.
at least.
Very nice.
And then in
Everyone,
the UK, it is 2 days later, so the 15th. I believe the UK launches books on Thursdays. So
yeah. So another related a question from Kay actually is, how do you plot out the Easter eggs for your stories, or do you?
So I do plan out the Easter eggs. It depends if I'm referencing a myth or I'm doing something meta referential to another fantasy story, or if it's within the novel itself. Because there are a lot of Easter eggs that if you read book two and you go back and reread book one, they're referencing each other. There's stuff in the past and present storylines that build off each other. Some of these have to do with how Ari tells a story. They're very specific to terms and his performances and how he does stuff. And those are the things that come from me having set up certain plot beats I know I want to hit. For people who want to learn to write, this is a technique that at least I became aware of that Robert Jordan did. I think a lot of pantsers naturally gravitate towards this, but he's a good example of if you want someone famous who's done it, where he pantsed Wheel of Time. And this is actually corroborated on Brandon Sanderson's blog where he goes into this. He calls him a discovery writer instead of a pantser. And Jordan's process involved knowing just certain key beats of, I want to hit this point like in book 6 or 7. And then he'll seed it early on with like a throwaway line. I believe the example, and someone can double check this for me, is the character in the first book, Min, who has prophecies that she visually sees represented out through symbols. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do with that until he got to them later. And he's like, I can use this to represent this person who is representative or named of this animal instead. And it connects back to that. And it's sort of rereading your own work in his case, but while also sort of having an idea of where you want to go and then capitalizing on it on a later point. Because essentially what you did instead is, instead of 100% plotting it, you lied, but then you went back and you had the ability to make the lie true. But if you do that and you do it properly, it's still foreshadowing because you chose to capitalize on something you set up. So in cases with me, I have a bit of both where I know, okay, I want to do this by book 6. If I put this in now, it sets up or foreshadows that. And if I do this piece somewhere after this point, it looks like now I'm repeatedly seeding it in to get to that. And then if I do something else, perhaps that I leave innocuous on purpose in book 1 and I have a callback later, then it's like it's referencing itself. Or if I set something up intentionally knowing I'm going to do it later in the books in the past storyline, but I introduce it in the present, even though you see it first in the present, when you get the chronological context that happened in the past, it forces you to re-examine how you view it in the present. Now, you know, this was influenced by that. Because you can actually do it both ways if you have the timelines that allow you to. Introducing something and not explaining it and then explaining it in the past completely changes how you might interpret the present story when you go back and reread that present section, versus if it's all linear and you do it here, introduce it, you pay it off. Now you foreshadowed that. And then the other way around, you're actually just revealing it.
So
it's the same technique though.
Yeah. How carefully did you plot out the timelines before you started writing first binding? Like, did you have it?
Not 100%. The things that I would have plotted out 100% are the nesting stories, which are the world building and myths that also have meta referential nature. They're not just there for world building and fun. There are a lot of Easter eggs in them too, which is a point that Ari that is maybe not so subtly said in the books, that every story has its secrets. That's repeated a lot for a reason. And then from that, I have just the key beats, like Ari's legends, like all the great claims, like with the one-liners of what he's said to have done. Those are plotted out. Those are written down, like he has to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And then what might happen is either I 100% pay that off, or I show how I might have subverted it. Like, okay, you heard this legend. It's claimed to be his, but here's the truth. But you can see how it evolved to become that legend. So it's a lie that was given further breadth, and it became like the truth as the world canonically agrees on it, even if it didn't happen, which is we've seen with history in our world.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Until the squirrel killed Ari's parents. Yes.
For what it's worth, the squirrel did not kill his parents, but yes, yeah. There are a lot of yes.
And John Douglas makes an appearance. Okay, so a couple more questions. That's not what I wanted to do. All right, so Bo wanted to know: at what age did you unlock your or master your ability to smolder on demand? I had to ask.
I don't smolder. I don't. If I have mastered it, which I don't think I have, because then I should be getting paid for that. I don't know what age it would have been.
There's no good answer to this question, Bo.
People have started saying it though. 2016. When was I 26? I'm old now. Wow. 2016, 2017, when I started attending Dragon Cons and getting noticed. That's about how long people have been saying it for. So almost 10 years now, at least people have said it. So maybe 10 years ago that's at least when the smolder stuff started happening, and then the badges started 2018. I know, because they have not stopped since.
Okay. I know growing up you had a crush on the Pink Ranger. Do you think her training would allow her to resist your smolder if you met her in person?
What the? I think every 90s kid had that crush first, in my defense. Although I don't think I need much of a defense. It's a completely understandable thing.
Completely. I think I did, and I was a 70s kid. I think I had a crush on the Pink Ranger.
Okay,
maybe it was less appropriate. Maybe it was less appropriate for me. I think I was a little old by the time she was on screen.
I think she would be able to resist.
Now, what's the deal with the I know R of? Oh, is this? I feel like I've heard you tell the story, but I can't remember the details. The I know R Virdi ribbon at Dragon Con.
Yeah, that comes sort of with the smolder stuff, but I was invited to Dragon Con, and they were super sweet and gave me a signing. And I felt really bad because I thought and this isn't true. I learned this obviously older and wiser, but I felt like I was taking someone else's signing by accepting it, because I'm like, I'm a small author, nobody knows me at this time. Like, am I taking someone else's spot? Like, I know the con knew that obviously I wasn't taking someone's spot. They offered it because they had it, but I felt really bad. Like, shouldn't this go to like an author who's going to have people show up? And I shared that with some friends, and I was just like, I feel really bad. Like, they're already putting me on panels and stuff, and like, they're already doing so many nice things for me. I shouldn't be taking a signing. No one's going to show up. No one knows who I am. And then a friend's like, I know who you are. I'm like, yeah, you're my friend. You're supposed to. And then people just like showed up with these badges of like, we know who you are. Like, we'll be your fan club. And I was like, oh, okay, this is cute. Also, kind of. Oh, okay, like, why did everyone start doing badges? And I was like, okay, it was in the first year. I was like, okay, it's really sweet. And then it happened again the year after that. And then they started spreading the badges like to people I've never met, and like they were taking photos of them. Like, this person knows you now. This person knows you now. This person knows you now. I'm like, oh, okay, like that's
you were viral, man. You were viral. That's what that is.
It's like,
that's fantastic.
I don't know. It's still kept up every year. Even conventions I'm not at now, I will get tagged on Twitter and Facebook of like, hey, this person now knows RR Virdi. I'm like, I think it's become like a meme of its own at this point, because it doesn't matter what I say or do. It's like it's not attached to me. It's its own thing at this point. Like, there are people just giving I know RR Virdi badges and bookmarks to other people who don't know me and have never met me, but then I guess now they do, and then I get tagged in the photos.
Have you seen any Ari cosplay yet?
I have not. I actually cosplayed him on the debut of the novel in August at Dragon Con. A friend of mine made his cloak. She actually is a I don't know what the right term is. Like, I guess a tailor, but she's a crafter, and she specifically actually does Norse stuff. Her background and everything. I believe she's like Scandinavian descent, and she does like medieval and like Norse clothing, like actual for fun, like full, like the actual full clothing, but she could make a cloak. So she actually made Ari's cloak and cowl for me, and the hood as well, like the whole 3-piece to cover my face. Fantastic. The actual thing. And then a friend actually carves stabs. He's a good friend of Jim Butcher's as well, and he's actually carved like stabs just for fun. So he's carved like Dresden stabs, and he does the Dresden cosplays. He actually made Ari's staff from book 1 for the debut at 2022 Dragon Con. So I was walking around dressed like Ari with like the loose linen shirt, pants, had the staff and the cloak for the signings we did there.
Nice. Now, when you do the Jim Butcher, not Jim Butcher, the Harry Dresden cosplay, do you wear the hat or do you not wear the hat?
I actually don't do the cosplay, believe it or not.
No, but this guy you're talking about, I want to know if he wore a hat, because the hat is to me is the funniest thing in the Dresden
Right.
Because they're on the covers. Because Chris McGrath is my artist too.
Yeah.
So I know working with him, I love the guy, but then it's like, why is this hat always there? And it's like, that's what Chris does.
Yeah.
He gets an idea. It's like, I'm going to do that, and it's great. It looks fantastic. But then you're like, it's not in the books.
Yeah.
Never wear an ad.
I know some people do it just because like the fun now. Like every Dresden fan knows the story in the community. Like the hat's
Yeah.
not canon, but then they do it to like either just poke fun at that, and some people just like the look with the hat.
They do look good. They look good.
I don't think he's ever done the hat cosplay, if I remember correctly. Because at Dragon Con, he and his wife do a lot of different cosplays. So I don't actually like focus too much on the Dresden ones there. And then
Okay,
I'm
fair.
actually not in the Dresden fan groups and community. I'm actually not in any author fan group communities because unfortunately, and this is a personal choice, I before I even published, I saw a lot of internet toxicity toward Jim when he was going through a lot of life stuff that he was vocal with about like the delays and the what now came out, but as Peace Talks and Battlegrounds, the 2 books, there was a period where a lot of people were waiting for Peace Talks, and he was super open on the internet about going through his divorce, stuff with his relationship with his son. His dog of like 15 years had died, who was like his best friend. And I even before I published and became an author, I was just tangentially aware of like the horrible things that were going on. And I know that it's a small pocket of any fandom, but it just freaked me out. Like I've been, like I said, very fortunate to meet a lot of authors, including some of my heroes, and I just don't like being in spaces where like I could see people I care like about getting harassed by a small portion of the internet, because that's not the real world, right? Like it's not like there is a difference too. Like you go to a bookstore, no one's harassing these people, it's all the fans came out. But it just felt really weird. So like I don't actually know. Like it makes it hard because I'm out of the loop of a lot of fandoms because of it. I actually don't know all the fandom secrets and stuff. I might know the author, but even the author at times is disconnected from fandom.
I think the indie world has less of that because people have the sense that indie authors, generally speaking, are not. You're not punching up when you take a shot at an indie author. You're punching down, right? No, Jim. You can punch up at Ben Jim, but he's a famous, rich, dude. People are willing to take shots at him. They wouldn't take at someone like me, right? Whatever, because who they, so you see less of it.
I just never liked the idea of punching at anybody and
No,
no,
one should.
I'm not judging. I get, I just think it's like there shouldn't be an argument either way, because I came up indie at a time where people were still punching down, actually, because this is when, if you weren't traditionally published, you weren't a real author if you were indie. Because I published in 2013, which was just a year after.
We do still hear that.
Yeah, you still hear it. And
in fact,
I did see, which you might be aware of too recently, there was somebody who took a dump on Twitter. I saw this shared on Facebook on indie authors, unfortunately. And
I know the person.
Yeah, and one author tagged another very successful indie author who I also happen to know, and he's actually a very sweet gentleman. He's been super kind. He'll be at Dragon Con, who's been doing really well. As an example, and it turned very unfortunate, derogative towards indie authors, and it's really sad. I actually believe indie is one of the best things anybody, for watching this, can do for your craft, because you have no obligations to anything, which can kind of hurt if in terms of building a series. But if you want to write a completely different book to push your ability, you're allowed to do that. No one can stop you. You can take a lot of creative risks with your prose, with your structure, with genre melding, whatever you want to do. It doesn't mean it'll succeed, of course, which can suck if you're relying on that. But I actually think indie is where some of the best craft is happening. I'll go on record and say that.
You're preaching to the converted. I mean, I'm an indie author. I think everyone watching is down with indie. They're all people who read indie books. So yes, yeah. Why I love talking to indie authors, the renaissance of creativity. I mean, certainly not, but it ruins your career, Andrew.
Yeah, that's not true either now. Like I understand the sarcasm font she's using, but now
she's being sarcastic.
The industry has changed a lot, where like if you get successful indie, it's very common for traditional to come just want to buy you because you've already done the legwork, so it's an easy acquisition for them.
I'm sure people were telling you though that having published indie, maybe I'm wrong. I would imagine. Let me rephrase. I would imagine people are telling you, having published indie books, that going after a traditional contract for first binding was a lost cause. I'm sure. Weren't people?
Believe it or not, I did and didn't hear that because I wasn't actually seeking traditional publishing with Tales of Tremaine. I thought I was going to indie publish
Oh,
this. It was never planned to be. Like my entire history, which I can do the short story real quick, was this was
yeah,
originally going to
please.
be like a radio drama that I was pitching to Audible, episode by episode, in the vein of like the old, Twilight Zone, and when you had radio plays of like
Yeah,
one episode a week. And Tales of Tremaine was supposed
right.
to be serialized because Audible actually entertained with this when they were doing the Echo or whatever it is, the tower that they had that had their what is
Sure.
it called? The Amazon device where you can speak to it just like a Siri, and it can do whatever you want,
Alexa?
including yeah. So
Yeah.
they actually did a radio play later with this, which was like a their own like sci-fi thing, kind of like a Firefly, and I think it flopped. But I was trying to bring back the idea. This was during the pandemic, especially. I wanted to capitalize on it again. But before we sold Tales of Terrain, I was positing like, wouldn't it be cool if we had like the Superman radio plays again? I think we're going to go back to short form audio content episodically. And Tales of Terrain was going to be written that way, like a seasonal thing, where every week or month, whatever timeline Audible decided, you were going to get a chapter of Tales of Tremaine performed like a full radio drama. So it's not just Ari's voice and narrator. You would have like the sound effects, like when he's banging his stat. That's why it's written in a way where he's performing with certain sound effects like a real storyteller. And the original intent was you would get that. You would have cups and mugs rattling on tables. You'd have the audience. And that didn't come to fruition. But originally that's what the plan was. And I had 10 chapters. And agents were approaching me at the Nebulas that year, and the only thing I had that was new that wasn't indie was that, and they all just said no because of the intended size. I'm like, well, if this is going to be a book, the first act or what became the first novel was going to be about 350,000 words, because I knew that like I at least had enough of the structure of where I wanted to go with the first part of the
Hmm.
story,
Hmm.
and I'd arced it out more like an anime season. That's why the 12 books can be broken up into 3 arcs instead,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's essentially just like an anime. You have just arcs, and they were like, no, this is too big. It won't get published. And in fact, an agent didn't pick me up there. What happened was I was talking to a tabletop RPG editor, and he had someone else at the table who was also an editor, and I didn't know they were an editor. And we were just talking about the idea of Tales of Tremaine. They asked me, what do you do? What are you working on? And I was telling him his name is Chris Morgan. Like, oh yeah, this is going to be influenced by all these fantasy stories, but also South Asian culture. And I want to detangle a lot of the myths and beats and tropes and show the similarities, but through a South Asian
Yeah,
lens. And I gave him all the spoilers because I didn't think it was going to get published. Audible was the only one
sure.
talking to me at the time. So I was like, this is going to be like a radio play, because Audible at that time was still interested. They hadn't said no yet. And then they never got a chance to, because what happened was that editor, Chris, told me like, well, I'm an editor at Tor, send me the sample. And I was like, okay. I didn't believe anything was going to happen because I didn't have an agent at this time. No, I was super. He was super polite. I wasn't
Yeah,
like
that's
being rude. Like,
awesome.
no, I just didn't think it would, because there were so many back channels of, you need an agent. It's like the stamp of verification, and I had been indie the whole time without ever thinking of going traditional. This was a passion project I was writing for me, and I gave him the book, the 10 chapters, which actually the last chapter he had was chapter 10, I believe, which is Brahm, where Ari's doing the rhyming story that he performs in full verse, with the rhyming couplets and quatrains, but then it has normalized prose in it, and then it has a little
Hmm.
section in verse
Hmm.
again. And
I
that was the
remember.
last chapter he got, and he called me, I think, a month and a half later. So this would have been end of October, early November, because it wasn't December yet. I know that, because December is when I got my agent. And what he said was, like, we love this. How many books do you have planned? What's the idea? And we talked over on a phone. And I was like, why? He's like, Tor wants to buy this. Don't give this to Audible. And I was like, oh, wow. I don't have an agent. And he was like, yeah, you get to go pick one if Tor's giving you a contract. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So I
Agents do
actually,
like that, from what I
yeah.
hear. Right?
And then I signed with my agent Christmas of
Phenomenal.
2019, that December. And then the official contract came immediately spring when publishing restarted. They already, like, I guess, talked to my agent about it, and they just need to go through like marketing and whoever legally types it all
Right.
up, and that was that.
So I've
It was
noticed,
weird.
and I've heard you mention also that your writing is has a rhythm and
Mhm.
is written in such a way that it's clearly enhanced by being read out loud. It has a I don't know if poetic is exactly the right word, but maybe it is. Maybe poetic is the right word, but it not all writing is meant to be read out loud, and yours clearly is. Did that predate your intent to go to Audible? Is that just how you write in general, or was that
No,
something you did
no,
because of
that
them?
was specifically for this and for the idea it was going to be
Okay.
orated before oral performance and listening with Audible.
Right,
That was
right, right,
that's
right.
actually not my original tone. I do genuinely enjoy it because I've always been a poetry lover and I've always loved that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
when I
yeah.
started, my original genres were urban fantasy, and
Right.
part of the reason I love doing this for the first binding and I'm okay with it is I just generally love tone and how voice sounds, and I love experimenting more with voice than anything else. So I actually wrote that book you brought up earlier, Shepherd of Light, specifically to write another voice, which was the sort of slang you hear in westerns and space westerns, like in Firefly. That book was entirely
Mm,
written for a love affair to practice voice, and it's a
mm,
very
mm.
space western sounding book. So a lot of the culture tackle stuff you see in space westerns, which are socio-political differences and issues, as long as like class stratification and money, and the idea
Mhm.
of a galactic consolidated base that might have more power and education, and then like a more rural society that also speaks that way because again, lacking education and certain accents that just proliferate in certain areas.
Mm,
And
mhm,
urban
mhm.
fantasy is a love letter in terms of tone to the noir PI investigator, which is my favorite version of the genre. I know there's a lot you can do with urban fantasy. I particularly really love those styles. Going back to Raymond Chandler and that specific voice they have, that very clipped staccato noir voice I genuinely love that. And then the first binding was me getting to do a lot more poetic and lyrical
Right,
writing because of also the things that inspire it. All the old epics are epic poems. The South
right.
Asian ones, like I said, use rhyming couplets and quatrains. There's a lot of nods to them. The old epics also have a lot of epithets, and they also have kennings. So, example like the Norse poetry, you would say instead of going across the sea, it was called the Old Whalebone Road, which is a really beautiful way of saying that, and it makes sense if you think about it, because whale carcasses float, and the seas and the oceans are not littered, but they are filled with whale bones that come to the surface eventually, and the carrion are picked clean. And the sharks and seagulls will pick the meat clean off the you just have a floating carcass. And it was a beautiful way to say that, though.
Right,
We're traveling
right.
across the whalebone road, and I have a lot of techniques like that too, where you'll see certain things referenced with like a hyphenated, combining two words to sort of elicit a different or more beautiful way to say something that could just be said as road.
Yeah, I
And
always
that's
think
coming
of
from the tradition.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I always think of writing as either pedestrian or not, right? You've got like this sort of the way that anyone would write it, sort of the most basic way, and then you can riff on that in various directions. So
Right,
you write in
right.
different voices. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and that comes from personal
Totally.
just passion, though. It's like I
Yeah,
one of my motivators in writing is I love how people sound. I actually love
yeah,
accents. And I don't care which accent. I just love different accents. Like I actually love
yeah.
the variety of Southern accents in America. People don't
Sure.
understand that, but like the breadth of how multiple different Georgian accents are, because you have like a very high sophisticated Georgian accent that sort of gets riffed on. It's become an archetype and a trope of itself of like a wealthy rich villain usually. In
Right,
cartoons, you have like the
right,
guy who's wearing like the
right.
white suit, like out of the Dukes
Yes.
of Hazard or something. And then also more recently in Jack
Boss
Reacher.
hog.
Yeah, but in
Right,
Jack Reacher,
right.
the animated, I mean not the animated, the the media
The
version that's on
Amazon,
Amazon. Yeah,
Amazon. Yeah.
one of the antagonists is was I think he was a mayor, right, running the crooked police department down there and influencing it, and he has
Right.
that very high, like just educated Georgian accent, which is very different than more rural parts. And then you have different variations within Texas, and then Louisiana, which has like a Shreveport accent, which is very different than a New Orleans accent.
Sure.
And then there's Cajun and Creole, and like just the breadth of different American accents alone, I think are really beautiful. And it's
Yeah.
cultured me sort of in like how I want to write fantasy. That there's people just have beauty in their voice and how they say things and
Mm,
sayings as
mm.
well. Like there's a lot of country sayings too. Like right, like I've been doing this since I was knee high to a grasshopper. That
Yeah.
adds
Yeah.
some depth and realness to backgrounds and locales, and it's a very easy way in my mind to add just extra world building, which readers
Right.
appreciate if you could do it
Yes.
without overburdening them, right?
Yeah,
And
because you're
it's
telling
why
something. Oh, there are grasshoppers in this world, and they're common, and you're saying all this
yeah,
stuff, but
yeah,
without pointing a finger at any of it. It's
yeah,
yeah. No,
and
no.
through character identity. So it's why I love writing for also just the idea of voice.
Do your characters have accents in your mind? Like,
Yes,
do you hear them as this person is Southern or whatever,
yep, and it's
and
why
that
I
influence?
do focus
Yeah.
on regional differences in the books too, where even within
Yes.
the Mudri
Yes.
Empire, I also focus on appearance differences,
Yeah.
mostly to bring that up because I don't think people realize how diverse South Asian culture is,
Right.
in terms of just physical appearance. Because and this is both
Yes.
good and bad because there's unfortunates with it where colorism is a thing in South Asia, and there's a
Oh
gradient
yeah.
of very light skin to dark skin. But there's also eye colors due to the
Hmm.
Indo-Aryan heritage. In India, especially northern India, gray and green eyes are really common, or more common than you would expect in a country like that, like a variance of the great gray green eyes. Also religious differences, because Catholicism took root there as well as Christianity, right? You didn't just have the Dutch and the British. The Italians traded along the road. Multiple different religions were birthed out of there, such as Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, obviously Hinduism, Zoroastrianism was practiced there, and then also Catholicism, because the Portuguese actually had a conquest and ruled in India longer than the British. People don't know that, but earlier than the British, the Portuguese were there for 400 years. In
People
Goa
from
and
Goa
Kerala.
all have the Christian names, and I'm trying to think of an actor's name I can't remember right now.
John Abraham.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking of John Abraham.
There's a lot of
I remember first seeing his name on a not a marquee, but in a cast list. And I was like, that's a weird Indian name. And I said that to my wife, whose family is from Bangladesh, and she's like, no, it's not, you schmuck. Like, it's not. You're just ignorant. That's why you think it's a weird name for a person from India. I'm like, okay, educate.
There's like tens
I learned after the
Christians and Catholics there, which people don't know.
Yeah,
because that you have
it's a big country
names. Yeah, and then you have descendants of them who might move here, and that they'll just have a Western American name because their background's Catholic or Christian.
Yeah, and people, I think, in my shoes, often assume that they adopted those names coming here, and then again my wife was like, no, you schmuck, that's not what happened. They're from Goa, and that's their name.
Like one of the weird things in Taylor Tremaine is it constantly gets referenced as Hindu mythology, and it's hard because I try to point out like it's actually referencing older than Hindu mythology. I'm choosing Vedic, which predates Hinduism, because that's like the closest root we could find that inspired everything that came after it. Because I didn't want to just do Hindu because my family actually isn't Hindu. Now I'm agnostic, but my family is actually Sikh. And Tales of Tremaine covers that too. Like there are nods to the other religious minorities. Like Bangladesh, Bengali culture was its own culture. They had actually some different myths as well that are localized. Like there's actually a Bengali deity that is a dragon force deity that people don't know about, and I think it's called Bunk Bung, which is it's an antlered horned dragon that was a forest deity, and that particular deity doesn't show up in overall Hinduism. It's culture to Bengali culture, and there's all of these micro variants that I try to address. So in Tales of Tremaine, you see this is a crazier example, but there's a place called the Hunza village, or the valley. And it's now what's in northwestern Pakistan, and it was part of a early by land trade route where Europeans could come through to India when South Asia was one place that wasn't partitioned. And because of that, there's actually a lot of European influence in the DNA, and you can see it where there are South Asians there with very blonde hair, like pale eyes and pale skin, but they have South Asian features at times, or rusty red and brown hair is actually still common there. That place in Pakistan is actually the inspiration for Shangri-La in the myths and the stories later. But because of that, there's actually, like, people don't know there's a breadth of fair-skinned to dark-skinned Indians across the continent, and there's also different hair color and genetic eye color variants. And I showed that in Tales of Tremaine. So in the mountain regions, this is a fantastical take, being completely honest, but I have a few characters who are introduced as they have white hair naturally, paler skin, and lighter colored eyes. So that's just nodding to that heritage of like the mountain regions, especially northern India, having fair skin and cultures, but showing that like not everyone's the same shade of brown, different builds. My culture unfortunately gets critiqued a lot, where Sikh people are sort of seen as like the rednecks and like either that or the jocks of Indian culture. Like Punjabi Sikhs are seen as like uneducated because there's a huge history of them being farmers and blue collar workers and also wrestlers. On average, they're like taller people, bigger built, broader built, and they get relegated as that. And I've been trying to include positive aspects of Sikh culture. So in book 2, there's a nod to the kara, which is a metal bracelet that Sikh men wore when they were soldiers. And the actual advent of it was also a makeshift knuckle duster, because it was a solid steel bracelet, and in war you could slip it off and just put it over here and just deck somebody. So it's a functional war tool, and there's a nod to that in book 2 of Tales of Tremaine. So there's a lot of different, like me trying to incorporate as much as I can from South Asian culture as a whole into the series.
See, I don't know if I would have caught that, but now I will. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Ronnie. I'm a big fan of knuckle dusters too.
Yeah.
So it's gonna work for me, at least one person. So good. All right. Well, that is phenomenal. What's up? Eddie Castro shows up as we're closing up. I think I've taken up a lot of your time, and Ronnie, I cannot thank you enough for coming on here and answering my burning questions, which is my terrible pun for the show. I thank you so much, and I'm going to start by telling everyone they should buy If you have not already, buy the first binding and pre-order The Doors of Midnight now. And Ronnie, is there anything else you want to plug or pitch? Or
I
you have
guess if people are supporting The Doors of Midnight, if you're in America, because there's already for the UK special editions and 2 great independent bookstores you can support there. For America, we're doing a signed pre-order campaign with Loyalty Bookstore in Washington D.C. So if you just want to get a signed hardcover, they will be shipping those out, and it will be supporting an independent bookstore if that appeals to you. I mean, the price is still going to be the same from the bookstore no matter where you get it. So if you want a signed version, you can check them out. They do have a placeholder plays on the website already, so you can just Google The Doors of Midnight and Loyalty Bookstore, and it should show up.
Fantastic. That is awesome news. We like our special editions and our signed books. Okay, so I think we are good. So again, thanks to everyone in the chat for joining. Thanks everyone for watching. I never know how to end these, so I'm just going to end it. Let's awkward pause. Let's do awkward pause. Yeah, okay. Take care, everyone. Do I know how to end these? Oh no, sorry, wrong button. Another awkward pause.